As Arcane Season 2 wraps up with the last act, the plot is reaching towards its climax and the stakes have never been higher. As Arcane is primarily a show about external conflict first, but internal struggles play a huge role in individual character development, we should expect the final antagonist to embody the biggest developments of the overall story. Season 2 has shown many important, nuanced characters, and each of these three characters can be a major contender for that esteemed title of Final Boss. So let's talk about the likelihood of each of these fantastically written individuals and how they might impact the story. Mbessa is the obvious choice. As a force to be reckoned with, she's the only outside party in Piltover with a literal army backing her up. Especially following Caitlyn's sort of betrayal in Act 2, we saw her go mask off, no holds bar, and send her entire forces to fight what's basically 5 people. Especially with her right-hand man Rictus getting brutally disposed of and one of her core motivators being sacrificed, we have been told repeatedly that Mbessa is desperate and now so more than ever. Throughout Season 2, Mbessa has been trying to play the cunning manipulator, the fox not so different than what she raised Mel to be, and swayed all of Piltover to instilling Caitlyn as the pseudo-dictator. Over the time skip, she kept brainwashing Caitlyn as her private tutor, drilling into her hand-to-hand combat, lessons in leadership, and Noxian ideology. With the hole in her heart left by Vi, Mbessa filled that in as Caitlyn just wanted to attach herself to her duty of stabilizing Piltover and catching Jinx. As for Mbessa, her goals have always been Hextech, so she forced Piltover scientists to learn it after losing Jason Victor. But over the course of several months, she's stuck in the same place. Now, after losing her grip on Caitlyn and subsequently Piltover's governance, Mbessa is all out of options and leverage, and she is backed into a corner. Her only solace is her newfound alliance with Singed and giving him freedom to perform his experiments and make her more monsters. From the trailers, we see Mbessa lead a Hail Mary charge into Piltover with Shimmer Noxins. Since everything Mbessa has been doing is for Hextech, she's probably trying to steal Hex Gems or research notes or maybe even take control of the Hex Gates. She is a threat to be reckoned with, probably the strongest person in Piltover at this moment if Warwick is dead, and her giant forces, naval artillery, and Singe's chemical supply may be enough to overcome our main characters. But I think Mbessa is the most narratively shallow of all of our final antagonist contenders. Her being a villain doesn't say much. As an outside force, her story is extraneous to the overall conflict of Piltover and Zaun, and everyone overcoming Mbessa as the story's final hurdle is wasted potential. A lot of people say that everyone unites against her in the final war, but I doubt Mbessa, as the main villain, with how many allied forces she has, stands a good chance against the combined might of Jace, Mel, Caitlyn, Vi, Echo, and Jinx. Remember, at the end of episode 6, she sent her army to fight just Jinx, Vi, Caitlyn, and Morwick, and they were still struggling. I doubt that just Noxus alone, no matter how much Shimmer they take, can stand a good chance against all of our main characters with Hextech weapons, prep time, and an Enforcer army accounting for how useless the Enforcers are. The point of the climax is not only to build up and resolve the story's main conflict, but also to be the most exciting part of the story. With Mbessa as a kind of objective bad guy with everyone else putting aside their differences to fight her, that really takes away from the stakes of the story as all of the internal political and interpersonal conflict is just stripped away to face the big bad. Arcane is more complex than that, and the simple big bad wolf won't fix all our issues, and the story has been drilling into our heads about how complex everything is. Focusing the last conflict about an outside force other than the entire Piltover Zaun relationship that the show is centered around will likely lead to bad writing. So some aspect of Piltover and Zaun will be in play simply because that is what Arcane is all about. The trailers also haven't shown us anything about Jace, Victor, and Savika, so there's a lot of room for things to go. So I say that although Mbessa is a significant threat and has been built up as an antagonist, she's not important enough in the grand scheme of things to be our final antagonist. Yes, she will play a major role, but the focus will not be around her. More like a mini-boss. Like with how she's been portrayed in Season 2 so far, she will be a tool for pushing the plot along for greater things to happen. The climax of Season 2 Act 1 was about Jinx versus Vi, with the resolution being Caitlyn's rise to power first and foremost, and then Mbessa secondarily. The climax of Act 2 was Jinx's relationship with Isha, with Isha's entire story ignoring all Noxins. By that I mean her sacrifice. Since not a single Noxin soldier was trying to kill her, her last contributions to the plot focused only on her, Jinx, Warwick, and maybe Vi and Caitlyn in peripheral. Mbessa was not at all the centerpiece to the Act 3 climax, though she did initiate the developments that brought us to that point. It's going to be the same thing for Act 3. This story has never been about Mbessa, as important as she is portrayed to be. The conflict and progressions of the city and its characters are too big for her, and she is mainly used as a plot segue into real story culminations. So some other character will team up with Mbessa and take center stage as the true, narratively presented antagonist. Now, this relationship may be close as a direct conspirator with her, or it might be extremely loose, just taking advantage of Mbessa's desperation only to use her as a stepping stone. That brings me to Victor. As a Zaunite, there's a lot of flexibilities the writers can achieve by keeping the story about Piltover and Zaun with Victor as the main antagonist. Also, with his monologue at the end, it foreshadows how the good nature and intentions of Victor, after getting attacked by Jace, will warp his perspective on humanity, Hextech, and goodness overall. This coincides with his in-game depiction as more of an anti-hero. Furthermore, the trailers basically start out with the defense team saying how Victor is behind everything. I know I keep bringing this up recently, but we do see a shot of Piltover with the arcane corruption taking over the buildings and no one talks about it, so Victor is probably allowing and facilitating the arcane's encroachment. As for plot relevance, it makes a lot of sense for Victor to be the final antagonist as the embodiment of the Arcane and hence the show's namesake. It is also super likely he teams up with Mbessa. He and Singe were already having meaningful discussions about human nature and evolution, and it wouldn't feel forced for him to join back up with his mentor. Also, Singe talks about fusing Victor's body with Warwick's blood to achieve ultimate strength, and in the trailers we literally see Singe juicing Warwick for the Victor smoothie. Victor, Mbessa, and Singe are gonna have some relationship. Now, you could argue that Victor states his disassociation with warmongering, but after his Act 2 developments, anything is on the table for him. He might realize that war is beneficial for his ultimate goals or betray Mbessa at the end. But Victor is probably just an avatar of the primordial primal desires of the Arcane itself. A lot of people don't mention his weird relationship with Skye, how she's suddenly so knowledgeable about the Arcane and they are so close hugging and holding hands. There does seem to be some importance to her research notes, or maybe Victor just felt lonely and wanted to keep her diary. But I see no world where this image of Skye is completely Skye, and there's definitely some Arcane in there manipulating him. Extremely so, as he was speaking to it directly in Season 1 as it gave him visions to build and feed the Hex Core. Skye might just be a personification of the Arcane's influence on Victor, pushing him to break and embrace magic over humanity in a twisted way as he is unknowingly ensuring its eldritch takeover. Victor becoming the big bad would also tie up a major part of the story, that being magic. The Arcane has always been amplifying the stakes of the show, as every climax has something to do with it. In Season 1, Act 1 was Powder blowing everyone up and Jace inventing Hextech. Act 2, everyone fought over the Hex Gem. In Act 3, Jinx used Hextech to declare war. Now in Season 2, the Arcane has been even more important, with Jace glitching it out in Act 1 and Victor's commune collapse in Act 2. But again, I do want to say, if I asked you what Arcane is about, what would you say? Magic, though it is central to many character arcs, has not been fundamentally what Arcane is about. Why does Jace build Hextech? To develop Piltover and help Zaunites. Why does Victor turn to magic? To help the suffering in Zaun. Why does Jinx want the Hex Gem? To carry out an independent Zaun for her father. The Arcane has been secondary, it always is, and alongside that fact, Victor is nowhere near as important to the main messaging of the show. Arcane started out with war on the bridge between the two cities starring two sisters, Vi and Jinx within Piltover and Zaun. Arcane is all about them, and always revolved around the relationship between sisters and cities. So what does that mean for the final villain? Well, I do want to talk about some noteworthy dishonorable mentions. First, everyone at the council bunker table is a good guy. As much as we all hate Jace, he is a hero in the narrative. That's why he eventually proposed peace in Season 1, and he probably has some good reason to killing Victor. Same with Caitlyn. Although she is in her dictator arc, she was giving pushback to Mbessa and struggling to go full martial law on Zaunites in Act 2. Vi has been our hero from day one, and Mel has always been on the side of peace no matter how manipulative she may have been. But no one here is narratively portrayed to be an antagonist. Now, a lot of people say it's the Black Rose, but I think that they were included to hint at the greater world of Runeterra. If the Black Rose suddenly came into the scene as the main villain, drawing attention from everything we've been getting from Piltover and Zaun just to focus on a sudden threat we know nothing about, would divide the fanbase. I say that because a lot of people already dislike the Black Rose stuff. Fact of the matter, they haven't been built up enough to be a threat to Piltover as we know it, just a threat to Mbessa and her particular story. It's also hard to care about them, and giving them sudden depth and importance in Act 3 might feel rushed. Now with Savika's poster coming out in preparation of the final act, you could say that it's her, but she's not that important of a character and we all know it, and no one talked about it in the poll I did. People also say it's the Arcane itself, but Victor is basically an avatar of that, so I lumped them in together. If the Arcane separated itself and was a threat of its own right, then it would kind of be like the Black Rose deviating from the Piltover story. Not saying this would be bad 100%, as you could write themes of foolishness and arrogancy, but point still stands, the show doesn't center around magic. It's the same argument for the Void. So that really leaves only one option in my subjective eyes. There's this lesson in narrative analysis I want to talk about. There is is a difference between micro and macro storytelling. What do I mean by that? The micro narrative centers around what makes sense in the short term. What are the pieces needed to get things to where they are? Think small things that push characters or plot points in a direction. Macro storytelling is the overall long-run direction of plot and characters. If you base predictions off of what the micro narrative is telling you, you won't get anywhere since that medium is largely short-term and super dynamic. For example, at the end of season 1, I saw a lot of people say how Mel dies because she is right in front of the rocket, and that just makes logical sense. But Mel ultimately lived. In my videos, I never once said that Mel had any chance of dying because of what the macro narrative was telling us. Her story arc was not done yet, she has more developments with her mother, Piltover, magic, and peace that were hinted at, and her magic tattoos going right before the rocket was an obvious inclusion at how her story will go. The writers, if given a choice, will always prioritize telling a good story over a logical one. But a logical story does contribute to a good story. The micro narrative is not important for predictions because there are an infinite amount of different ways the writers can make Caitlyn and Vi get together, or Mel survive the explosion. But with the macro, understanding the larger picture, we understand that Caitlyn and Vi have to get together to resolve their issues, and Mel survives for her plotline. Looking at the macro instead of the micro is how I'm able to be so accurate with my predictions. Savika was always depicted to lead Zaun and gravitate towards those with vision. Caitlyn was always depicted to have a darker turn for her character, paramount to her understanding of the geopolitical dynamic. Jinx's rocket was always a declaration of war, Warwick was always meant to regain his sense of self with the help of family, and the Hex Core was always implied to be alive and wanting to use Victor for itself. As for the theories I've gotten wrong, it's not because I failed to see that Warwick had to die to solidify identities or Isha had to die to bring Jinx into full fruition, but the specific micro reasons of how their story comes to an end. How does Isha die? How does Warwick die? That is all micro. What I'm saying is that the macro is going to be what determines the story, especially at the climax when everything has been building towards this one point. The writers have always said that this story had a specific vision for its ending from the very beginning. So I'm gonna double down, and I got a lot of heat for bringing this up, so I do want to preface that this is just my interpretation of the story. I think it's important to bring up who I think is most likely to be the final antagonist of the story, and if I'm wrong, I'll embrace it, and you guys can crap on me all you like if I'm wrong, not that you need permission. If you do think that the villain is someone else, then great. I love hearing different interpretations and takeaways, and the community discussion is what's made Arcane so enjoyable for me. If you disagree, then take what I say as just a fun idea that could possibly happen. No deeper than that. Nothing I say is definitive and just how I see things going from my perspective, and that's completely fine. So, onto my pick for main antagonist. When Arcane Season 2 Act 1 premiere happened, there was an interview asking each of the cast members to describe Season 2 with emojis. All of them included an explosion emoji. So far in Season 2, there hasn't been many explosions. Jinx shot a few rockets in Act 1 and Isha blew herself up in Act 2, but it's nothing too different from Jinx destroying a building or blowing up a bridge. No explosion worth describing a whole season after. I've said from the start that Piltover will get destroyed because every landscape shot of the city we get has dark undertones for the city's collapse. Blowing up all of Piltover would also set the story's stakes way beyond anything we've seen in Season 1, truly defining the season on its own. If you want to hear more, you can watch my videos about that, but everything I say is based off of the fact I think Piltover will explode, so I am biased. Who makes the most sense to blow up Piltover? Obviously Jinx. You can give me the micro reasons for Victor with the Arcane's power, having the potential to destroy the city, or Mbessa wanting to conquest Piltover, but the macro storytelling of Arcane has always been about how Jinx embodies war, carnage, and destruction. And Jinx taking down Topside with a big nuke drop would be symbolic in an infinite amount of ways, enhancing the story much more than if Victor, Mbessa, or the Arcane did so. There has always been a part of Jinx to want to destroy everything, and she has explicitly stated so in Season 2, and a lot of people failed to see that in Season 1. I admit my biases since I have an agenda to uphold and videos to feed, but I think Jinx is and has always been the main antagonist of the story. Not that she was always an antagonist throughout the story, but the build-up has always been leading to that route. I talk about the reasons why in many videos, but in short, I think the narrative spits in our face that this is the case. Obviously, there are no villains in Arcane, and everyone has their justified motivations for the things they do. Jinx being a villain to Topside makes her a hero for the Undercity, and things will always be complicated in Arcane. But strictly speaking, since all of our heroes and protagonists represent the side of Piltover and peace, the opposing force, defined as the antagonist, is whoever fights Piltover and prevents peace. Jinx started this war, and it makes sense for her to end it. Yes, this season's macro has been telling us that Jinx is a hero, but I need to reiterate, a hero for whom? Definitely not Topside, since Caitlyn Caitlyn and Mbessa have been hunting her down, and there are wanted posters everywhere. The narrative has not been saying that Jinx is Piltover's hero. Zaun is also definitely playing a role at the climax, especially since they teased Savika, but we have no trace of them in the trailers as well. From a micro standpoint, which is very inconsistent and I'm likely to be wrong, I think Jinx probably helps Mbessa and Victor against Piltover before betraying them, and the armies of Zaun storm into a beaten Piltover army to claim independence. Let me explain. A lot of people mention how Echo helps Vi and he's wearing the same paint as Jinx, so that means they are together. Never in the macro has Jinx's story been about Echo or teaming up with Echo or anyone else to defend Piltover. This is a micro reason, and with any micro reason there are a million different ways the writers can explain this connection. Maybe Jinx trolled and tied up Echo like she did with Savika. Maybe they team up against Piltover but Jinx betrays everyone at the last minute. Maybe Echo fights with Jinx but learns she wants to destroy Piltover and defects to topside. Micro predictions can go in any direction. There's a similar critique you can talk about for the macro level. Jinx is bound to eventually redeem herself, and teaming up with Piltover does that. I agree that she will be redeemed in that scenario, and that would also be good writing. Teaming up with Piltover or becoming the villain and learning the errors of her ways both lead to redemption. But the fact of the matter is that Jinx being the villain has been more built up. Now you may say it's repetitive for Jinx to be the villain again and fight Vi. There's a difference between being predictable or repetitive and being narratively built up. In Lord of the Rings, we are told from the start that Sauron is the bad guy. Does that make the ending of the trilogy with a major war between forces predictable? Kinda yeah, but there's a million ways that writers can make an ending that is not repetitive and still exciting. Just like how they can write a final altercation between Jinx and Vi to truly redeem Jinx and have her never slip back into the diva of destruction, brimming with hatred and wrath. That scenario would not be repetitive. And if you guys love discussing micro reasons, then I want to ask, who is Vi and Echo flying up towards? It's all but confirmed that Jinx is flying in an airship and Mbessa is fighting from land. So Echo and Vi have to be fighting someone in the air. You could say Victor, but you have to acknowledge that Jinx is a valid possibility. If anyone in the section brings up the Echo paint, then you have to answer this as well. We also see Jinx's balloon base behind Mbessa, but she could just as easily be attacking Mbessa rather than Piltover. You could also say it wouldn't make sense for Jinx to work with Mbessa because she kinda caused Isha's death, but there's a bunch of ways Mbessa can manipulate her into doing so. Lie about Singe, blame Isha's death on Caitlyn being an inside agent, or maybe Jinx just joins her just to eventually betray her for revenge. More micro reasons. But it's important that not a single Noxan soldier even attacked Isha in the battle, distancing themselves from being complicit in Isha's death. This would make space for their possible collab. I would also like to mention the scene where Mbessa glances at Enforcer Jinx but walks on. Mbessa isn't dumb and she definitely knew it was Jinx, but all she cares about is Zaun being a threat to Piltover, so why not let her loose in Stillwater? Also would foreshadow their eventual team up as Mbessa sees Jinx as a worthy asset to her plans. But these are micro explanations and don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. What I'm saying is that it's really possible for Jinx to ally with Mbessa since their interests coincide with attacking and destroying Piltover. And you can't say it's completely impossible to write this scenario to make sense. Jinx and Victor also have some deeper connections, especially with how mesmerized Victor is with the gear Jinx caused to drop in episode 6, so I can definitely see the two being buddy-buddy and launching an assault. Victor and Jinx is much more likely than Jinx and Mbessa. Also, in the trailers, Vi and Echo are both begging Jinx to move on, become good, and work with them. You can't say it wouldn't be more climactic for Jinx to turn on all of them, in spite of their pleas, but it would make more micro sense for Jinx to be swayed to their side. But back to the macro, Isha's death has always been the turning point for Jinx to embody all of Zaun's wrath. So I think it's more likely it's a key motivator to send her off the deep end and find her purpose leading Zaunite forces into a dismantled Piltover to destroy the whole city. Jinx won't be completely irredeemable, killing numerous amounts of civilians, as it's possible Heimerdinger and Mel do science magic shenanigans to protect the people of Piltover. But that's micro speculation. When it comes to wrapping up a story about Piltover and Zaun, family and misfits, war and peace, no one would do it better than Jinx. Few details I want to mention at the end. Jinx in the shark hood with the shark smile imagery is very similar to Season 1's Rocket, giving credence to Jinx further perpetuating war, but again, nothing definitive. There's also leaks for Act 3 that came out, allegedly, but they came out on 4chan, and I'm not going to trust 4chan, and I never watch leaks anyways. Not saying I'm trustworthy or anything, you shouldn't believe what random internet person says. It's good to look at things with an eye of skepticism. Also, from the last video, a lot of people say I have bad media literacy and I don't understand Arcane, which is provably false, as I wouldn't be able to predict anything then. Not saying I understand it better than anyone, but my understanding is factually not zero. If you think it's low, then that's fine, but not none. Otherwise, how was I so accurate in all of these videos? The difference in viewpoints is that you are focused in the micro and ignore the macro storytelling, and I'm the inverse. That's why our perspectives may contrast. I'm always open to criticism and I enjoy hearing your opinions, so be civil, and I'm confident that Arcane enjoyers can be just as nuanced, complex, and articulate as our favorite story. Thank you for watching. watching. Do you think Jinx is gonna go full villain, or am I schizo and I'm too biased and I'm actually ruining Arcane? Whatever you may think, I'll read all your comments and I'll catch you guys in the next one, yeah? Bye.